Marine King Prime and NesTea at the peak of their powers. Two Wings of Liberty StarCraft 2 legends face off in a GSL finals that many people remember and look back at fondly. This is not one of those GSL finals that's a 4-0 that nobody likes and is a huge letdown. This is an action-packed GSL finals where both players really played up to the reputation. Marine King Prime was this exceptionally aggressive, micro-based Terran that was always putting pressure on his opponent no matter the matchup. And NesTea was sort of thought of as the successor to FruitDealer, who was the Zerg that won the first GSL finals. I did an entire Venomous Classic video on that. Link in the description, make sure you check that one out because it's sort of interesting to see how it progressed in terms of the Season 1 GSL final winner was using Baneling drops and lots of Nidus play and this quirky, high-risk stuff where he cut a lot of corners and skipped stuff and had to get lucky but really kept his opponent off guard and showed masterful play. That was FruitDealer. Well, NesTea was the guy that said, okay, well, you know, if you don't want to do all this insane dribble between the legs, Baneling drop on mineral line, wacko stuff that it almost looked as though we would never see again after FruitDealer retired. This is just how you play safe, straight, standard macro Zerg, and that was NesTea. NesTea was a guy that went all the way back to Brood War, was a middling B-teamer there for a long time, went under the ID Zerg Bong, which is just fucking amazing. I mean, Zerg Bong. And the only reason he changed it is when BattleNet 2.0 came out, which if you don't know, like back in the Brood War days, it was BattleNet 1.0 and then 1. Whatever whenever it got patched. You could just say all sorts of wild shit. It was like a sort of like a early internet moderated chat room if you think about it, whereas of course BattleNet has had chat filters since the first day Wings of Liberty came out. Here we see the map, Shakur's Plateau. Not a great map for Zerg, and remember, because this is the second GSL ever, this is a very bad for Zerg map pool. Good for Terran, a lot of these maps. I think Lost Temple's in this beast coming up here quick. But Shakuris was brutal because it was old Shakuris with the backdoor rocks where you could be backdoored and spawn in close by air with your opponent, like we saw in Idra vs Shinro in January of 2011. Lost Temple, Cliff over your natural. If you watch this channel, you know that. Third map, Scrap Station. This is the map where we saw the last champion, good old FruitDealer, take the deciding match, Game 5 vs Hope Torture. You definitely want to check that series out if you haven't already. Then Jungle Basin, super Terran favored map, really congested. Some of these maps, even for macro Zergs, you're sort of saying to yourself, maybe I should just all in. And you know what? Here's a great example, Steps of War. Throughout this GSL, because they are not doing extended series a lot of the time. And then Zelnaga, which was a pretty open map, but decent. And when you look at the other maps, it was not that bad for Zerg. You just had to not die to Hellions. Then finally Metalopolis, which was actually a good map, assuming you didn't spawn in close positions, which was hell on earth and could make any good map just become an auto loss. Now that is so important. Without a neutral depot or rock at the base of your ramp, and a lot of these maps being able to spawn you in close by ground positions right on top of each other, Idra even said this worse than Steps of War. Close by ground, Metalopolis, worse than Steps of War because of the terrain. So yeah, you could spawn in close by air and it would be kind of close and congested for Zerg and not that great. Cross positions, it was a standard great StarCraft 2 map. What you wanted to see, your people that you really liked, your heroes and the people you cheered for, duke it out on. Cross positions, Metalopolis, that was the standard macro version. But then they could spawn in close, and that was sort of a joke. And it was brutal for Zerg because sometimes we would see these scrappy series where the Zerg would be going blow for blow with the Terran, and an obviously Terran-favored metagame, you know, when you look at map pools like Steps of War, and then you finally make your way to Metalopolis, and it's like, well, okay, well, there's a 33% chance I could spawn in positions that should be auto-loss. Very tough time to be Zerg, and this made it tough if you were a Zerg pro gamer because you would often just get knocked out of big tournaments. Because even in this era, the GSL didn't do GSL style groups, they just did a normal bracket. So if you got unlucky or lost a mirror match, that was it for you. And we saw a lot of great players lose in these really weird, close, fluky games. And if they had had the Code S style groups that we saw appear in the GSL in January of 2011, then they wouldn't have gotten knocked out. But this is what we saw as NesTea, who hadn't dropped a map up until this point, facing off against Marine King Prime, the insidiously aggressive, beloved player of the scene. Here we go, folks. Marine King Prime spawns in the bottom right-hand corner of Shakuris Plateau. And thankfully for our Zerg fans, NesTea is spawning in the top left. Now, of course, this map is Shakuris Plateau. When it first came out, which is this era, there were backdoor rocks, as we can see on the right side of your screen, spawning close by era like Idra and Genro did in 2011 of January in the GSL. The Terran can siege you with a 2-base push, and it's insidiously brutal. They're going to set up bunkers and turrets down there. You want cross positions if you're Zerg, and that's the rule of thumb for Zerg all the way up until the current day. The longer the rush distance, the better for Zerg. NesTea very badly wants to go for hatchery first. Now, I know if you are a current Legacy of the Void only viewer, or you aren't up to date with the Venomous Classic playlist, you might be saying, well, of course he wants to go hatch first. Like, unless he's going to be 2-raxed, he's going to go hatch first. Well, you have to understand a couple things. It was extremely hard to get hatchery first down in this era. Even on maps like this, if you spawn in cross, this was considered a macro map. If you look at the other maps in the pool, Steps of War, you spawn right on top of each other. This was, even though it seems like a close position map, this was a map that was new, that wasn't in Season 1, that Zerg said to themselves, well, okay, well, maybe I can get my damn natural in this one. And MKP is going to go double barracks on the low ground. Remember, Marine King took his pseudonym, Boxer, from the famous Brood War pro gamer Boxer, who was a micro-base aggressive Terran like him. The Brood War player Boxer was way more well-rounded, than MKP was. MKP, famous for not scouting, famous for constantly attacking, famous for being sort of a, not necessarily bad manner, but I don't think I've seen anyone manner mule more than MKP. And sometimes people get manner muled and it's like whenever, and then I've seen really chill pro gamers get manner muled and be really pissed off. So this was a guy with a lot of attitude and passion that a lot of Foreigner fans really loved. And MKP is probably going to get a bunker down here. We see double SCV action, 2 barracks on the ramp, no CC yet, and the mule was so powerful in this time. The ramp up was way slower. Remember, you have less workers to start out with, and this made even getting to your hatchery extremely difficult, and a lot of boys being pulled here as a Marine SCV all-in is going to occur, and the bread and butter of NesTea making it to this point without even dropping a map was learning how not to die to this kind of stuff, because this used to just decimate Zergs. Like, Terrans would have a 70% win rate just doing this. And SCVs are going to surround the spine there, and that's just jaw-dropping. And the drones are going to try to surround the Marines here. This is what you're really going for in this drone/Ling versus Marine SCV micro battle. And it's very interesting because this is the sort of stuff that we've seen since Brood War. Some things never change. It's true in real life and it's true in StarCraft. And MKP is going to micro his Marines back in. He'll have 3 left. NesTea will probably have some more Lings hatch, but if we look at the workers here, they both have a handful of workers. Literally a handful, like 6 versus 5. But guys, the Terran player has mules. Mules are worth about 5 workers, and thankfully NesTea is going to try to swat away these Marines. But since Marine King can mine with 2 mules at once, it's basically going to come down to the fact that Marine King is mining with a whole mineral line worth of workers, 15. He doesn't need that much money to produce off of 2 barracks. And even though NesTea is on 2 bases, he hasn't even started mining gas. He's not going to get Ling speed. He can't afford a spine. Zerg is in this position where when they get caught badly off guard and they get railroaded by a timing, they have to say to themselves, okay, I'm either going to commit completely to a counter all-in, and I mean the guy has 6 workers. How strong do you think that counter all-in is going to be? Or I'm just going to have to drone and be really greedy and hope he doesn't attack. And then if I do see the attack, maybe I can pull something and defend. But NesTea is down to, he was down to literally 5 workers here, folks. No queens, no infrastructure, no link speed. So Marine King says, well, I know how many workers I killed, man, so I'm just going to send a follow-up push. He's going to pull the boys, another Marine SCV all in. And this is Reddit's hero, and I don't say that sardonically or mean-spiritedly because they literally paid for him to go to MLG Orlando and win the event. This player was absolutely beloved by Reddit, and it was really Reddit at their best, sending him to an MLG. And NesTea doesn't stand a chance here, as Marines, of course, are ranged units, so all of the Zerg units are just going to fight the SCVs, and the Marines are going to sit there and do extremely high DPS the entire time. And even if all the units that we just saw on our screen died, the Terran player would be able to drop another mule and make another SCV. So Marine King takes the first game there. And that is more significant than it is in normal best of 7s we see in current GSLs. Because in current GSLs what happens is they're pretty much, I mean, if you look at every GSL since mid-2015, they're playing on a bunch of standard maps. There might be one of those weird 4-player GSL maps that always gets vetoed in the groups that they end up having to play on, but there's no Steps of War. There's no insanely imbalanced map that a lot of people consider to be heavily favored towards one side. So whenever you look at these old finals, you really have to look at it from a Zerg perspective, because Zerg is, remember, different from Terran and Protoss in the sense that all of their units come out of the hatch, so if they have to make aggressive units, guess what? They can't make their workers. That's a big reason why Zerg had trouble at this time. And you know what? Shakura's Plateau is definitely a Zerg favored map. So the fact that NesTea lost that is pretty damning for him and a big deal. Let's go into the next match here, fellas. As this is on Lost Temple. Alright, Lost Temple is one of the most iconic maps in StarCraft 2 history, and it's funny because it was also in Brood War, but if you go back and play it in Brood War, it's way different and doesn't really have the same sort of feel. And if you're a fan of this channel specifically, the Venomous Stare YouTube channel, I will sometimes play people in 1v1s on this map, like my friends or mouthy people I get in 2v2 games. And of course I've casted some pro matches from this map, and this is a very funny map. This is a map that you look back with and just get filled with reverence and a sense of nostalgia, because there was a freaking cliff over your natural. And I don't mean that hyperbolically. There was no ramp up to it, and you could drop stuff on it and destroy the Zerg. Highlighted organically and not preemptively, by the way, by our handsome observer. So all of this map really came down to was, how am I going to take my natural if I'm Zerg? That was all it was. If you were trying to play Zerg on this map, you were in this position where you really didn't have any base to expand to. And you might have felt this way in a lot of different maps, but what really happened with Lost Temple was it was no joke, because there's an island base in the corners. Okay, well that's terrible for Zerg. No one's getting Fumunized Carapace and Ventral Sacs off of one base. Keep in mind you can't take your natural. Alright, so the island base, clearly really good for Terran. A lot of this stuff was better for Protoss than it was for Zerg. The high ground over the natural, the island base. But it's so good for Terran. You can go like Rack CC Wallin and quick float to your island if you spawn cross positions or close by air positions. And then Zerg has a really hard time ever figuring out what you're doing, because it's very hard for Zerg to get an overlord over there and diligently scout that island base, especially when they're going to have their overlords really focused on the cliff drop or figuring out what you're doing. Remember, in this era, this was when the Queen was really bad. This was when the Overlord was insidiously slow, and Overlord speed was locked behind layer tech. Way more of a guessing game for Zerg. And Marine King Prime, aka Boxer, aka Foxer, who we're still seeing in this game, in Game 2 of this exceptional Best of 7. Make sure you sub and turn the bell notifications on, by the way. MKP was so good at exploiting this. MKP knew, okay, well, I'm an aggressive style player who likes to put the pressure on, And I don't really have any qualms being silly, doing the same thing over and over again, being abusive, doing really obnoxious proxies, not ever scouting, and just doing very cutthroat builds that can frankly just be countered if I'm scouted properly. It might seem like, well, doesn't that mean Marine King had a lot of holes in his play and was very exploitable? Well, maybe it did, but whenever you played Zerg in this era, and it was way harder to play defensive, no Ravager, the Queen is worse versus ground and air, you are in a position where you don't have the Ravager, so if you open Roach in any way, well, you can't transition into something useful. The Terran goes like BC, Banshee, some sort of abusive siege tank thing. You can't bile it down. Zergs who started playing recently, or even Zergs who don't really remember this time, who have been playing forever, they don't really realize how much utility the Ravager gives them, but more importantly, how much it prevents them from being abused. The Ravager might seem annoying because we see way more Roach builds, as we see a Thor ship drop, which you saw. The two most lethal strategies on Lost Temple were the Thor ship drop on the high ground and the double tank drop on the high ground. And MKP is going to run some SCVs over to this little corner, and then he's going to presumably elevator them over and either have them to repair or make turrets. And we see NesTea, he's trying to get Spire, he is getting a Spine Crawler, but hey, there's a chance MKP just does a big, 6 racks Marine SCV all in and kills him that way. So that's what's brutal for Zerg is, okay, oh, I see Factory. Okay, great. Is it Tank Drop? It could be 2 Factory Hellion Blue Flame. Could be Fast Factory to get 2 Starport Banshee. And beautiful Tank Drop, Thor Drop, excuse me. They're basically the same thing and function the same way as, first of all, you focus out the static defense because that's your biggest threat. Second of all, if the Queen ever gets in range, the Thor decimates the Queen. And then you park down here on the bottom side of the ledge, or mineral side I should say, because if the Zerg were to spawn 12 o'clock, guess what? Obviously you're going to park on the top side so you can get that mineral line. But MKP went right for a second Thor, which is funny. This is typical MKP. It's like, I'm going to do the most abusive thing and then do a basically identical follow-up that gets to showcase my micro and really put the other player on the back foot. And notice he drops his Thor down, very brazen here, and snipes the Queen. See, the Zerg Queen was horrific versus the Thor, and that's not really an engagement we see very much, because when we think of the Thor, it's like, well, it's there whenever a Mewling-Baneling fight happens, historically, right? Well, when the Thor harasses, when we do rarely see Thor ship, it's like, whoever goes Thor ship, well, like the American player Ruff, okay, well, like, when else have we ever seen Thor ship? Well, on Lost Temple, for Christ's sake. People would drop Thors because they would decimate Queens and Spine Crawlers, and you can micro them and pick them up. Now, the tank couldn't be picked up when it was sieged, and you still had to get siege mode research from the tech lab, so it was a little bit less powerful in sort of a laughable sense. And here, the big reason we see the Thor is it counters Muta, and did counter Muta, and still is good against Muta all the way up until now. Whereas if you go tank drop, you're sort of relying on, oh, you're going to get Marines up there, you're going to get a bunch of turrets up there. It's a little bit more gimmicky, a little bit more reliant on building stuff, and well, I hope he doesn't have the towers and see the SCVs wander over. Remember in the Venomous Classic, the last one we saw that's sort of the intellectual predecessor to this one, the FruitDealer video, where FruitDealer cut all the corners and pulled all the strings. He blind set up spines. He had his spines way done before freaking NesTea. Well, Into the Rainbow did a virtual identical build of this, except it was a siege tank drop with turrets, what I was just talking about. And FruitDealer was able to hold it, because with the siege tank variant, yeah, you do have to siege up. With the Thor, worst case scenario, you just pick up. And it's very easy to abuse the Zerg whenever they are trying to go into mutas, and it's going to hit before they get into mutas. But NesTea just beautifully squeezed out mutas, and we can see, like, this is the absolute most abusive, cutthroat, yeah, I'm just going to keep all inning, yeah, I'm just going to keep all inning version of the push. A lot of players, even the Korean Terrans, who were known to be very cutthroat and ruthlessly abusive to their Zerg brethren, anyone that got on the Korean ladder or got in their way in tournaments, which is fine. Obviously, you're doing to play your best, but if we're just talking about the difference between the servers, yeah, the NA players might have been just as cheesy, but the Koreans had brutal cutthroat all-ins and were great at the timings. There were a lot of different follow-ups to that push because what we saw was essentially if you were Zerg, you knew that you were going to get Thor or tank dropped on your high ground 95% of the time. Some guy might go Banshee, some guy might go Marine SCV, but you know what? More power to him as we see Marine King really lacking here mechanically and allowing the mutas to get damage. He knows the muta's route. He should be on fucking high alert, ready to repair that turret. And this is a good example of how if you were Zerg, you had to do little things like this to get back in the game. Sniper turret, pressure depots. And you know what? In a minute, when he tries to repoke in that area, a lot of players will have forgotten to remake turrets. So, you know what a lot of players would have done is drop that first Thor up there, and especially if you get the SCVs up there, you know, it's a fucking dead hatch 100%. The Zerg just can't defend it. Because the Thor can limit the high ground vision, and you know what? With repair and turrets, and the fact that it counters the queen and the spine, you're never going to be able to stop it if they fucking execute it properly and you try to go for that style defense. Now if they do what FruitDealer did and it's like, oh, it's a sloppily executed siege tank drop where he's going to siege the tanks up in front of me and I can kill him with spines, yeah, you get lucky. That's how you had to win with Zerg in this era. The other guy had to make a mistake, even if you were perfect. That's what made it imbalanced. And we see a little bit of Thor pushy here versus Roaches, Slowbanes, and a handful of mutas, and some Marines are attacking without stim. Really no reason to attack here if you're Terran, because the map is so Terran favored. All you have to do is back up, take your third at your gold, make it a PF. I mean, look where stim is. It's 90% done. Folks, this is called an anti-timing. Remember, there's no medevac boost. It's not as forgiving. An anti-timing is whenever you attack when an upgrade is 85% done. It's a mistake. And we can hear the sad music wailing away from Marine King as suddenly NesTea's been given a break. He said, hey, my opponent killed my natural. I went down to one freaking base, and it looked like I was trading off mutas for the game, but here we are. Remember, folks, in this era, Thors did an insane amount of splash to the light damage units, and this is a huge crux of the issue. Listen up here. The muta did not have the health regen ability. That started in Heart of the Swarm. So when your mutas got damaged, it was a big deal. Your mutas would not regenerate quickly. They would basically be at static health. And it was interesting. Remember that famous game that Idra left versus MMA on Test Bug where MMA fucking shot his own third base? And Idra was being dropped and attacked, and he was taking damage, ended up leaving. People always wonder, well, why the hell did Idra leave that game? And he said in an interview, and this is the crucial part of the quote, he said, my third base was being attacked, I was being dropped in my main, and here's like the bold text. And I was losing my mutas to a drop, and muta retention was everything TVZ at the time. And that is the quote that you really have to put a big gold star by, and when we look back at this era, you really have to remember, these aren't the super powerful mutas that we deal with now in Legacy of the Void. You know what? The Legacy of the Void muta, way better than the Wings of Liberty muta. And it's funny because the Roach was even worse as far as the utility and the range and everything else, and it was also in a position where you were sort of thinking to yourself like, well, wait, hold a second, like, wait a second, as Mike Francesa would say, the muta's also worse, and it's like, yeah, that's why these Zerg champions were incredible and were way ahead of the time. And Marine King, here we're going to see his famous Marine splits, and notice he puts the Marauders and the Thors out front. Those are the Sponge the Bane hits, and he pushes NesTea back, and look how many mutas that NesTea lost. And that's a great example of NesTea probably had that similar engagement 150 times in the week leading up to these finals. He had to practice versus just different ladder Terrans, top tier Korean Terrans, and it just looks like Foxer, aka Marine King Prime, is just going to suffocate NesTea. And whenever you see Roaches defending like this, it was always, and I'm talking like 18 minutes plus in the game, it was always like, well, He made so many Thors and good units that you knew you weren't going to be able to remax with mutas, so you made a crap load of roaches, and it's like, yeah, but I don't really have roach upgrades, and roaches can't be turned into ravagers. So then these engagements would happen. It's like, does the Terran have any factory units, any marauders, or an upgrade advantage? It's like any one of those things, and the upgrade and the fight looks like that. And by the way, MKP knows he has that base over there, so he can just tease over here and make him blow everything and then pick up and run. Anytime Zerg pulls the drones here, it almost looks like it's going to be curtains. You would be surprised how like flimsy Macro Zerg was and how many times people did actually have to pull the fucking drones and would come back and win. Which anytime we see the drones pulled now, it seems like a joke. Drones pulled to defend, I mean, a crushing push. It's like, oh, he's pulling the drones. He's going to type out within 15 seconds. I'll give you like 50 to 1 odds. One hilarious thing about Marine King, though, is he does stay on 2 base super long. He does keep attacking, and he doesn't scan adequately. This is your prototypical hyper-aggressive Terran. So fun to watch. He's going to try to out-macro you. He's going to out-muscle you just by saying, look, I'm just going to rally at you and micro. You're not going to get good bane hits on me. Yeah, please make roaches. Roaches are terrible. And I'll make it hella late 3rd CC and deal a knockout blow while you're behind. Because if you constantly keep pressure on the Zerg, you're going to win most of your TVZs. That is a rule that has stayed true up until Legacy, over a decade later. By the way, guys, this isn't a decade in baseball as we see the crucial 3rd base sniped, and considering the natural already died once, this is probably going to be curtains for NesTea. This isn't a decade in baseball, which is like no time. This is decade in a freaking computer game, and it had just come out. So whenever something is shown off and actually sticks, all the way up until the current meta, where you have cretins saying that, oh, the game is dying, oh, like people are jumping ship, literally like not even halfway through the game's life, like people started really doing that meme hard, like in 2012 to like 2015. Now we're in 2021 and it's still the best RTS by far. It's god tier, and a lot of the players are still exceptional. GSL, which is what we're highlighting now, is still kicking strong. Living strong, still kicking. Don't want to mix up my idioms there. And it looks like NesTea is going to run out into the tower. And this was a weird thing. When the games were so scrappy and weird, and as Zerg you didn't necessarily have your very clear win condition, you would sometimes just range out and they would have an upgrade advantage or a way better army than you thought. And roaches were god-awful off creep, couldn't turn into ravagers. Don't know how many times I have to say that. And it's not because the Ravager is the end-all be-all, despite the fact that if you were to put the Ravager in this era, it helps you so much with defending abusive nonsense, especially positional-based nonsense, and wall-ins, stuff like tank drop, tank drop at hard counters. Thor drop it's good against, wall-ins it's good against. The Ravager really has prevented Zerg from being railroaded. And MKP is doing a big counter push here. He is starting to mine from the gold. Remember, NesTea had that huge dip in money because he lost that corner base right as the other one was finishing. So he hasn't really started to accumulate the income. And MKP is going to smash that base ruthlessly. Notice he's made so many Marauders where he can't really die to surprise Banelings. When, by the way, Marauders do bonus damage to armored units, that means they hard counter roaches. So you can kind of see here, if you were a Zerg player, it's like, okay, well, Ling Bane is kind of flimsy, and it feels like a good player like Marine King's always attacking. Keeps me on the back foot on these smaller maps as NesTea. Oh my fucking god, he manner muled him. Wow. So if you're completely new, let me explain something. You know what a mule is, obviously, if you're watching this. It's the Terran ability from the orbital you drop on the mineral that gives you extra money. It's pretty much Marine King's bread and butter. A manor mule is a disrespectful, get out, fuck you move. It's like the equivalent of like dancing in a MOBA game or teabagging in an FPS. I mean, you really are like typing easy non-verbally. And one manor mule is whenever you go to your CC and you're killing your opponent and they're about to leave and you know they're about to type out and you drop a mule like on the army that you're fucking crushing. in a game that you're winning, and that is literally like saying fuck you. Like, it's no exaggeration, it's like giving someone the middle finger right in their face, like over the game. And like, a lot of players will beat someone and then drop multiple mules on them. I want you to imagine like each mule to be a separate like blasting middle finger right in your face. Also keep in mind, the Korean pro gamers were usually very tactful, very manner guys. You had foreigners like Idra who would pop off, but to be a Korean pro gamer and to do ceremonies into manner mule and bad manner people, keep in mind Marine King's a fucking teenager and NesTea is like 10-year veteran, literally 29. That's pretty old for a pro gamer, and that's going back, or that's having like 10 years hindsight and knowing that DRG could come back from the military and be talented. But you know what? Let's just be real. Like, how many 29 pro gamers do you see making the finals of a 1v1 game? The legends. And that's what we're watching here, is the legend at work, folks. So let's go ahead and get into the next game. Really wanted to add some context here, because I mention this finals a lot in games that I cast. I always talk about the Marine King vs. NesTea finals, and I knew that I would eventually be revisiting it as part of the Venomous Classic, but I didn't just want to do it as a one-off, I wanted to do it chronologically. And because of the Gregathon, which is the series in which I take a look back at Greg Idra Fields' entire GSL run, Idra lost to Zenio in the round of 16 in this GSL, which was just brutal for Idra. I chronologued those games, of course, link in the description, link in the playlist. But hilariously, Zenio faced off against our protagonist Zerg, NesTea, and you know what? NesTea monster moded him. He fucking smashed him. He stomped his head in 3-0, and it was really weird that Zenio, if you look at his run, it was like he had to go through all these legends to a ridiculous point. MVP, Jokshi, Idra, NesTea. You know how many freaking combined titles that is in Wings? 20 plus. They literally named the guy who got into Code S the most consecutive times. That's NesTea. Then if you get into Code S 10 times, I think it's either 10 or 20. He's literally that effing amazing. I can't remember, but the award of getting into Code S a certain amount of times in a row is called the NesTea Award. And obviously, you didn't have Code S, quote unquote, at this time, as NesTea is just taking the risk here, saying hatch first, scrap station, really long air rush distance map. Now, if you remember, Hope Torture proxy reapered the protagonist of the first GSL finals in my video, FruitDealer, the first great Korean Zerg, and he walled him in, and FruitDealer again got lucky, and I don't mean that to degrade him, but it was like, it got lucky, aka the Terran player made a really goofy, unforced error. Everyone was still kind of newbie at this time, even the really good Koreans. And he just fucking walked a Reaper into the smoke vents that we just saw where the Zelmaga Cavern, Zelmaga Tower rather, was. It's very, very late where I am, and I've been feeling under the weather, hence the lack of videos, so I apologize for a little bit of sloppy noun usage. We see a CC first in the top side of the Terran base. This just screams to me that he wants to take the island. Scrap Station was abnormal. This was a close-by-air rush distance map, not like a Metalopolis or a Lost Temple where you could spawn in that way. It was 4-player, or you could spawn in the imbalanced way, or you could spawn in the way that was supposed to be played. No, this was a 2-player map, but there was a gold base at the very bottom, sort of 7 o'clock location by the 2 towers. This was a gold. Now, weirdly, this was good for Zerg because Protoss and Terran couldn't defend this. And Terran got ahead, they could get down there and make it a PF, but it was way out of the way. And just weirdly, like, no one ever took that middle third base by the rocks. It was so in the middle of the map, it was almost like the Jungle Basin Watchtower Plateau base. Terran player doing something beautiful, and that's MKP. He's floating over, and he's going to evacuate 5 workers. See, this is why I wish that they would include gimmick maps, at least one of them per pool, in the current days of StarCraft 2. it makes me very sad that so many of the maps these days are standard maps. It's like you watch the GSL now and it's like GSL Atlas, 4-player map, and the pro gamer's like, oh, 4 players, you fucking, it's like, guys, 4 players, that's nothing. A lot of the maps used to be 4 players, and I get it, it fell out of favor, but it's like, those maps get perma-vetoed, and then it's like, the only time we see them is in the round of 4 or round of, the finals, whenever you don't even have vetoes. You're just playing all the maps, you're picking, and then it's like, oh, well, if it goes to Atlas, Game 7, I guess I'm deciding my GSL fate on a map I practiced 4 times. I miss the unorthodox maps. I think that Pillars of Gold map was really cool because you could sort of unlock, it wasn't just like gimmick mine through minerals, like gimmick rocks. Like gimmick rocks and gimmick mine through minerals are stupid, but the Pillars of Gold map was cool because the mining of the minerals would actually dictate whether you wanted to play like a bottom side strat or a top side strat. That sort of stuff is cool. Putting rocks on third bases is not cool, and it was just lame for Zerg, especially in this era when queens were worse. So NesTea is going to see, okay, yeah, he's taking the island and it's MKP, so of course it's an orbital. He wants to spam those mules. MKP and aggressive players in general love mules. They love just drop spamming mules, always having production up, keeping pressure on the Zerg, which, remember, the bread and butter of this matchup is to completely spam your opponent with pressure, keep them on the back foot, make them make macro mistakes, limit their vision. This is why MKP was always such a good versus Zerg player, especially versus the foreigners. He really gave the foreigners trouble. And he's gone for double Viking here to hunt the Overlord spread. It's very funny to me. A lot of these phrases are just completely unused. And hilariously, NesTea said, oh crap, he's going for that island base. Oh, what the hell? The Vikings were mismicroed. That is so weird. The Vikings were mismicroed. And he's going for a Nidus play, NesTea's. And because it wasn't a freaking PF, it was a command center made into an orbital. Wow, MKP is going to take damage because an Overlord lived with 5 HP. That is bananas. It blows my mind that that would happen, and another Nidus comes up. Some of you might be saying, it looks like that guy Rogue, LOL, is 2 Vikings land and some Marines do, so MKP will stop this. But if you rushed out a CC here, you were and double Viking, this should have never happened. This was one of those like goofs or mistakes. Again, not to harp on this or be negative, and I'm not being negative, but it's like Zerg had to catch a little bit of a break. Zerg had to do something really intelligent and it not be reacted to perfectly. And that was it. You see how the Overlord lived with 5 HP? That wasn't an Overseer that dropped the Changeling. That was a normal Overlord. And if MKP had killed it with this Viking diligently, then you know what? It wouldn't have been able to Nidus vision. And if you have 2 Vikings out, good luck Nidusing. Remember, Overlords were slower by default, and it was harder to get Overlord speed at this time. MKP in a bit of a weird spot, adding a lot of racks. Notice how late his stem is, and just very bizarrely, NesTea being equally weird, Roach speed, Bane speed, Hydra range all at the same time, and he's trying to get that third base income going. Now this was truly a different time. And for those people who just want to make ridiculous blanket statements who literally never even played a game of Wings of Liberty, let me just say that these people were playing fly by the seat of their pants, reactive StarCraft, and were going punch for punch with each other. And even though they were the best that Korea had to offer, people really hadn't mastered the macro mechanics of camera hotkeys and stuff like that. So the play is a little bit weird because it's still kind of Brood War centric, but people are pioneering. Like NesTea was seen as a huge pioneering creative player, and we see him loading up here for a huge Roach Bane bust, and he's put the Nidus at a safe location after failing to be able to kill the island. He said to himself, he's made 2 Vikings, I'm not going to be able to bust the island, I'm just going to bust his main. Scrap Station had a huge rush distance, and there were 2 very hefty, high armored sets of rocks in the little middle Hanks here urethra, and he doesn't have any creep, so this is why he's using Nidus. And 2-2 is started for MKP, but he's going to get hit with the gnarly roach speed timing. We're talking speed banes, speed roaches is, my god, that hurts so bad. And a lot is lost from Marine King. Marine King, like players like Fantasy and Maru, famous for staying in games very long, even when they go down to very low workers and at a disadvantage. And of course, you're more than willing to do that if it's a GSL finals, but NesTea is going to march his reinforcements here. And notice that that gnarly little timing hit right before all that production came online. 4 barracks had add-ons coming at once. Now, I don't want to be overly nitpicky, but maybe players like MMA, Bomber, MVP, they add those barracks more subtly with the add-ons as they're teching up, but Marine King has to GG there as he gets busted by a nice Nidus play. Not really like that. He's more like us. He attacks and attacks, and then he has a lot of money, so he makes 4 barracks, and then when they finish, he makes the fucking add-ons. That's why people like Marine King. He was endearing. He was one of us. It's like scouting, nah. If he goes roaches, he goes roaches. Like, I'm just going to go 3cc. Like, who doesn't like to play Terran like that? And for Zerg, it was so frustrating because it's like, oh, he's not going to respect any of the cheeses. He's just going to play so aggressive, and he's so good at micro that I'm used to playing against aggressive players in my ladder session sometimes, but they're not like Marine King. And God forbid if you were a foreigner player, a European or an American player, Canadian, Mexican. So hard. Like, you play one of these Korean Terrans, it's so brutal. Especially a guy like Marine King, always keeping the tempo up on you. It's like, this is insane. Like, I can't hit my injects. I kill a push and one's already at my front door, and I go to make mutiling and I have 8 larvae. And not necessarily impossible when you have players like Stefano and Idra, but when I look at it and think about my ability at the time, I think, my god, like, that's just so daunting, especially on this map pool. Let's move on to the next match. We have to remember, because of the way that the map pool worked, you're not sitting there happy as an ST to steal that. Obviously, if you lost, it's like an auto lose, but you're not sitting there with a big banana grin. You're having to play Jungle Basin, one of the best Terran maps in the pool, especially for Terran players who are aggressive. This is one of those maps where no matter how hardcore of a macro guy you are, see that third in the middle there that's like on top of 2 towers, right where the Terran wants to put their PF and right where they want to push? It's a death nail. So a lot of Zergs looked at themselves and looked at their Zerg teammates and were like, so we just cheese on this one, right? Because there is a pocket base, so maybe we can get that sweet, sexy 2-base income and then have like double hatch larva production for a Ling Bane or something. But aggressive Zerg, remember, really bad at this time. You don't have the Ravager, which is seen as the linchpin of aggressive Zerg at this time. The Ravager is like the linchpin of stopping from being abused as Zerg and then being abusive. It's the best at those 2 sides of the coin. And when you're just making like the slow, terrible roach that, if you think about it, still had low range, it's a waste of money. Zerg players, they pretty much had figured out at this time, you do not want to make roaches. This is a last-ditch effort unit. That's terrible. You don't want to make this unit because it's going to be worthless. And we see here Marine King going for a Makarax. Maka Prime, his Terran teammate, a Terran player, Korean of course, in the GSL, famous for this style of barracks rush in which, hilariously, he would make a barracks in his normal sort of main base location with the depots, la-di-da, and then just hide somewhere else out on the map with an SCV and then make another barracks. Now the thing about the Makarax is you don't necessarily like have to have it be secret. If it gets scouted, not that big of a deal. And oftentimes you're literally just putting it somewhere outside your natural to play mind games with your opponent. I love the Makarax and think it's a story worth telling, even though it's a very simplistic sort of funny thing. because it really does make me happy in the sense that this is like RTS at its core in terms of hiding information from your opponent, doing the bare minimum in terms of a lot of guys will just make like the factory in scouting drone range of their wall in, or they'll be cheap and they'll wait until that couple extra SCVs is added before they make that second depot, thus allowing a drone scout. But I like this, the keep your cards close to your vest, and holy crap, I've made a barracks in the middle of the map, and even if you scout it, like what really do you do if you can't efficiently get speed and your queens are bad? So NesTea is trying to get a spine up, and it's funny because queens being so bad meant that really the defense to 2 racks and pressure like this now is like make an extra queen, get a tumor down, get the spine down there, connect the natural in the main with a tumor. And in this era it was like, I'm so freaking close to being about to die, I'm not even going to consider laying a tumor down. And oh yeah, I also can't afford a queen at my natural. And here we see one of the most insidiously powerful things that was really deemed imbalanced, that just got patched out of the game and sneered at by a lot of players as something that everyone knew was ridiculous. And that's the double bunker block at the base of the ramp. If we look at tournament games going into mid-2011, notice that Foxer continues to press forward. He wants to know, are you making lings? Are you making banes? Do you have 50 spines up here? A bunch of, like, what is going on? And also, this is a very intelligent thing to do in the sense that he doesn't really ever have a chance of being like, oh shit, surrounded, or being flanked, or having anything weird happen. So he's forcing the Zerg to make non-drones, make overlords, be scared, and he's also getting scouting information, and then if the Zerg isn't completely crisp and clean like freaking NesTea, then he can potentially just win. So this is what we're talking about. The Zerg can't even move out of his base, and it's like, yeah, if he makes a wave of drones, he's going to take a crap box. Because even though it's funny because you think, oh, pocket base, great for Zerg, as we see MKP screaming here with the 2 racks and focus fire workers, and now he'll focus fire the queen, and NesTea tries to surround with slowlings, the literal worst unit in the game. And I think if we can say anything about MKP's revolutionary micro tactics, it is that he really understood and showed us normie players how bad slow lings and slow banelings were. You really need a speed boost on those things because the Terran has micro ability, he's going to make you look bad. So you might be saying to yourself, well, why did Marine King run in there? Well, because he wiped the mineral line at the natural. As he's taking his own CC, he can easily double produce workers, make his depots, doesn't have to worry about being attacked, and drop mules, so he's ahead eco-wise. Oh yeah, and by the way, he's been producing the whole time. And he's killing workers. Notice how a lot of times he starts and focus fires the workers to really force them to engage, and then it's the backing up, the retreating, and he didn't really stop shooting until it was an insurmountable advantage, and then he tried to run straight back to the bunkers, showing that, yeah, even though NesTea sort of held the rush, and we see him retreating with the racks, because of the double bunker block in, it's like, what are you going to do? Move creep all the way down there when creep moved slower and queens were worse? That's a long fucking process, and you've been scared of making drones the whole time? Okay, the corner third bases, including the little area where he's breaking the rocks out to, are terrible. And there's no like we think now, like, oh, someone did a wall in cheese, or like cannoned you, just make Ravagers and bile it down. Not like this in this case. Some guy just made a couple bunkers at the base of your ramp, and it's like, oh, I guess now, like, I can't make drones, and I have to tech into Baneling. And it's like, tech into Baneling to do what? Like, get out of my base? It's like, what do you mean for your third? It's like, no, neither of the thirds are takeable for me on this map. This is why Idra 6-pooled on this map, when Idra famously never cheeses, or doesn't like cheese coin flip play. And we can see this was another desperate thing that a lot of Zergs would try to do, where it was like, if there was a weird backdoor rocks, like on this or Blistering Sands, it was like, okay, well, I guess I'll break it with all these lings I was forced to make after I was losing to this cheese. Oh, they have a wall in. They're not just like, he doesn't have like a CC building out here with a yawning main ramp. Like, I guess I'm dead. oh, okay, I'll make a shitload of Banes. This was really the best you had as Zerg. And because all of this was predicated off of like building for 5 straight minutes, your reinforcements were going to be shit here. And we see here all MKP has to do is his classic splitting versus non-speed Banes off of creep. And he can continue to make stuff here. Notice again his extra barracks with their intelligent little add-ons there coming into focus. He'll pull a few SCVs, but try not to lose a whole mineral line. And to lose about 10, but I don't think it'll matter. As if we look at the discrepancy, it is pretty filthy here though. 22 to 42. All he has to do is re-wall. And again, like if that all-in hit 20 seconds, is MKP gonna lose this? He had like an insurmountable advantage. The only way he loses is if he loses to a Baneling bust. And notice he didn't make a safety factory tank. He didn't make any Hellions which auto-counter Ling Bane. He went straight into the freaking medevac. Reactor into the medevac. And this is insane. This looked like for sure it was going to be an MKP win, as he's going to have to split as he lands more mules there. Classic MKP. This is insane. It's a slow Baneling all-in. It's like, MKP, you've been scouting him the whole game, running Marines in. You see if he's on lair. You see if he's trying to Nidus. You see if you spire. You see his third. Like, you know it's freaking hashtag Ling Bane. Do you make an extra droopy wall in? Do you get any Hellions or tanks? Both hard counter this. Like 4 Hellions, 1 siege tank. Decimate this. And there's no Liberator this time, so there's less defensive value for going quick starport with Reactor. And it's like, no, I'm going to build more reactors off of my 2 racks and not make any factory units. And then the Zerg kills him with the Bane bust. And he fucking loses. That is unbelievable. Now, in the same way that it's endearing to see MKP do this incredible micro and monster mode, these incredible pro gamers, it is also endearing to see him lose like that, because, my Terran brethren, I know you have lost games like that where you 2 racks a guy and he's basically dead, and then he does like a big counter and it's like, shit, I don't have enough at home, and you die. And it's like the worst feeling in the world. So this was sort of like the very first version of that. It happens to the best of us, I suppose. But that was just a huge turning. Okay, sorry, we're already in game. LOL. That was just a huge steps 4. That was just a huge turning point in the series, because NesTea obviously has to reel off a couple back to back before he can even get to the maps that are considered reasonable. In MKP, we could see how disappointed he was at the end of that last game. That was honestly sort of a choke. When you're that ahead with that sort of advantage on that map, it's like, how do you not screw that up? You've been scouting him the whole time, so it's no guess game. And hilariously, MKP never scouted, so I say he's scouting him the whole time. It's like you've been so balls deep in his base, being annoying and making his life a living hell. You saw what he was doing, even if you didn't mean to. Oh yeah, he's still on hatch. And he's been doing nothing but making lings, as I know that he would be. Oh, I'm down into his natural. I see nothing but lings. There's no spire. There's no nidus. Like, he's not gonna go roach, lol. What do I do here? He might fucking go backdoor rocks. He might go through the bunkers I made. Either way, it's gonna be Ling Bane. And like, what does MKP do in true MKP fashion? Oh, my factory's done. I'll make a reactor just so I can immediately swap it to my starport. I'm not going to make a single Hellion out of it. Remember, no mines at this time. But that's classic MKP, and here we see him opening for your classic 2 barracks bunker pressure. Remember, bunkers could be salvaged for 100% of the value at this time, so Terran players could fire these aggressive salvos at the Zerg player that could be utterly game-ending, that Zerg really had to respect. Speaking of respect, Zerg going for Speedling Expand tier. NesTea knows that, oh yeah, I'm definitely not going to be able to hatch first versus this guy on steps. Are you kidding me? And this is what I mean. It's like, all Marine King didn't even need the second barracks. All he could have done is pull in 2 SCVs, and it was like, a bunker is going to get down. It's sort of like if you immediately build a forge and then the map's really imbalanced and there's no neutral depot and you pull multiple probes. It's like, if a guy wants to cannon rush you, he's going to cannon rush you if you go hatch first. Look at this double bunker block again. And this was considered virtually auto win, as there is no backdoor escape path. Jungle Basin, hilariously, was one of these pseudo-compromises Blizzard did, where it was like, well, we know Zerg's having trouble in the short rush distances, really difficult for him, and NesTea's like, I am blocked in here, am I not? Well, this is how MKP plays all the time. Terran players were just stealing mad wins with this back in the day. This was just absurd. And in MKP's Immortal game we saw the last video uploaded, Kyrix actually had a patrolling drone to prevent against this. And here MKP is pressuring, saying, what do you have? How many drones do you have? Is it a baneling nest? Is it a roach? And he can just back into these bunkers and retreat stuff back, have the SCVs basically unloaded into the backside and repair. And I'll say it once, I'll say it a trillion times. You might be looking at this saying, oh yeah, well he'll make a few roaches, he'll make like 4 ravagers and just bile that down. No, not at this time. And look at this roachling completely surrounding the Marines. Essentially, if there was a way to mess that up, Marine King just did it. Because if he had just sat at the base of the ramp, the roaches and lings would have just gotten eaten up while the bunkers got mass repaired, and NesTea probably would have just lost the damn game. But MKP was never the guy to scout with one Marine. He was never the guy to scan the main. He was always the guy to put the most amount of pressure on, to double bunker block you in 2 GSL games in a row, and then aggressively swing his whole army in without any sense of scouting or what you're doing, and then finally lose his entire army because of it. Now we are playing Steps of War, and NesTea's sort of saying to himself like, do I macro LOL? If you don't know, guys, Steps of War is the shortest rush distance map in StarCraft 2 history. The bread and butter of Zerg versus Terran, especially at this time and all the way up until now, is it is all about Zerg making drones and drones and drones and spreading creep and getting map control. And the Terran player, as soon as they push out, the Zerg then has to cut drones, aka stop making drones, and make attacking units. And if the Terran is fastidious enough and gets into the position he needs to be quickly enough, then they're at the advantage. Now a lot of that has to do with the Zerg scouting ability, the Zerg's macro, like not getting supply blocked, squeezing out the most amount of drones when possible, and having a large amount of supply ready when they think they're going to be attacked, and not just being, oh, I'm getting attacked, and then you made like 6 lings or 6 roaches and you hear your supply blocked. If that happened in this era, you were dead. Steps of War, rush distance is literally 1 screen wide. It is absurdly small and hard to deal with. So you put yourself in this position where you're playing Zerg on Steps of War, and the Terran player can move from their natural to your natural before you can even get a ling off. So how do you play this? Marine King made his barracks at his natural and rushed you with double bunker block, which was ludicrously imbalanced and got patched out of the game. And then you're sitting here to yourself like, okay, maybe he's gonna stop. He just like makes barracks he makes Marines out of the 2 barracks nonchalantly. And it's not like he hits a big timing with +1 or anything sick. He's just like, no, these units that I had, I'll just do a random attack now. And NesTea, for whatever reason, with his little bit of indecisiveness, killed him because he canceled his Bane Nest. I guess he wanted the worker, or I guess he might have wanted Marine King to scout the Bane Nest because he did make it at the front of his main. And he wanted Marine King to overreact. Marine King did make the double bunker at the top there. And again, like, if you make a bunch of depots at the top in your Sim City, it's not going to hurt you. You can always lower them, remember. But anytime the Zerg does baneling aggression, you just raise the depots and like the baneling bus fails. So it's sort of a funny thing because Marine King, known for his micro, but not necessarily like his fastidious building placement and his macro, there were moments in his pro gaming career where it was like, I just like play really fast, blast K-pop, and whenever I pan back to my base, if I need depots, I make depots behind the mineral line, LOL. And it was like, oh, that might cost you against the best players in the world, the best Koreans. Salvages one of the bunkers, which is a microcosm, by the way, of why this metagame was bad for Zerg. Zerg is constantly in an auto-loss, disadvantageous position, playing Steps of War with no neutral depot. He literally goes speedling, expand, and still gets walled in. We saw this in Idriverse Tester, King of the Beta. It's like, I can open for the fastest links possible, and people still just will build the shit at bottom of my ramp and I'll die. That's ridiculous. Notice NesTea has like no economy here, he just has to go Roachbane. What is the perfect microcosm of this era is Marine King made 2 bunkers that would have auto-held the retaliatory all-in from Zerg, and then whenever it came time for him to pressure, he just salvaged for 100%. No harm, no foul. And what happens when the Zerg player, whose economy was ravaged by the inability to cut drones / make units, in other words, you either made drones or you made attacking units as Zerg. It wasn't that way for Toss, it wasn't that way for Terran because of the way that the Nexus and the Orbital worked. Obviously you get all your stuff from the hatch. This is why small maps are uniquely bad for Zerg. And FruitDealer understood there were a lot of like sleight of hand, mirror sort of, well I hope he doesn't see this, lol, I hope his screen's positioned here. Even though they were brilliant moves, it wasn't necessarily the most consistent thing. NesTea didn't lose a single game up to this point despite all this insane imbalance in the second season of the GSL. He's already lost 2 here. And you had to consider NesTea looked like this infallible guy and Marine King looked like the guy with this insane micro streak who was the next phenom, this jaw-dropping fellow. And Steps of War is so insidiously tight that we see here an actually somewhat common strategy, as repulsive as that might sound to Zerg players, where Terran, after securing their natural, would make like 6 bunkers to encompass the entire middle part of the map, and then they would just siege tanks up at the base of your natural with a crap load of bunkers, and it was like, okay, how am I going to engage this? He's got like, God forbid, like 1 Thor, but let's just say like Marines and like bunkers and I mean, if there's multiple bunkers with Marines in them, there basically might as well be a couple turrets. Like, you can't engage into that. You can still stem click on them. This is what I'm talking about. This specific spot. If you made so many bunkers where you couldn't flank all the way around with Ling Bei and Muta, let's just say this was an even game, is holy crap. How are you ever going to engage into this? Yes, 6 siege tanks and all these Marines. Notice Stim is just finishing though. And NesTea just GG's. He's like, yeah, I couldn't have held that if it was just the tanks. Marine King's like, alright, easy game. Marine King is 1 game away from winning GSL, and if we consider like how has he gotten ahead in these games, even in the games that he's lost, double bunker block at the bottom of ramp. You know, 5 months later, private tournament organizers said, that's absurd. Like, Zergs, you know, it didn't matter. It wasn't like Zerg bias or Zerg homerism. Blizzard might have had their head up their poop chute and might have taken way too long to patch anything like they always do. But it got to a point where if you were at an MLG or a Home Story Cup, you would play on custom versions of the maps, Cloud Kingdom, MLG, or, you know, like HSC, Lost Temple, Shattered Temple, whatever it might be. And the only real difference that these maps would have would that they would have a neutral depot that someone went into the map editor, some blessed soul, like nice username, went into the map editor and put a little neutral supply depot at the bottom of ramps. And that affected Zerg differently than the other races because of, like I said, the range units and the fact that Zerg is the race that's a little bit different than the other two and wants to be fast expanding. And it just made it where you couldn't auto-lose to someone building 2 structures at the base of your ramp. Bunker Rush was still exceptionally powerful and absolutely lethal, but it was like the difference between being able to throw a fastball at someone's head at 100 miles an hour and being able to throw it at their head at 92. It's like it's going to be brutal regardless, but at least if it's 92 you might be able to get out of the way. If the Terran can't sneak 2 SCVs up in the first like 3 minutes of the game, keep in mind a lot of these maps have a huge amount of space between your natural base itself and your main base itself. But what happens? Well, that means you have way less creep spread coverage. You can be bunker rushing way more spots. The the creep from your natural that just appears right as it spawns, which is right around the time people are going to try to bunker rush you, well, it's really never going to obscure the base of your ramp. So it's like if someone can just make 2 structures at the base of your ramp, the game ends. And that's the sort of imbalance that we see NesTea have to put up with. That's the sort of imbalance we saw FruitDealer have to put up with. And it really is a miracle that they got all the way to this point. And hilariously, NesTea had not dropped even a single map up until this point. You might be thinking, well, it was the second ever GSL. Who the hell did he beat? Well, he beat a decent Terran called the Best, but then he beat literally the best Protoss in Wings of Liberty, MC. And then he beat Xenio, as I told you earlier, the guy who beat Idra, and he beat Boxer himself 4-0. When Terran was strong like this, Boxer came off of beating Nada, who was like this god-tier Gosu Brood War legend that Tasteless and Artosis especially loved. This was a guy that Idra himself said, that's the guy whose replay pack I learned to freaking learn the game from, Nada. Boxer beat him 3-1. And then Boxer went on to play NesTea in the semifinals, and NesTea swept him. NesTea was fucking out of the world. And yeah, Marine King was an exceptionally aggressive player. He beat FruitDealer, the defending champ. He beat Kyrix, who, if you look at it on paper, like a player like Kyrix is supposed to be the type of guy who actually is good against Marine King's style. Marine King's going to stay on mass barracks and get into fast starport, skip his factory units, and just try to like attack. Well, I'm going to go like Roach Speedbane and never tech up. And Marine King, of course, had to go 5 games with Kyrix, and that classic game he had, which was really his immortal game that led to his success and led to the part of him being a pro gamer that people really remember him for. If that series versus Kyrix never happens, Zerg vs Terran looks way different. Maybe players like Idra and NesTea have a huge spike in power, and we don't see the GOM TVT era of 2011 where Terran was just exceptionally powerful and ruthless. Maybe that doesn't happen. This is why matches like this that define the metagame and change the way that people play are important, get featured in the Venomous Classic series, and deserve revisiting. Because there are a shitload of StarCraft 2 games, and there are even a lot of StarCraft 2 games where someone looks really good, and you sort of sit there to yourself and say, like, wow, like, I need to try to play like that. Well, there aren't really many games where someone is so god tier that they have their performance and it's like, oh, well, that's actually going to define the metagame for 10 years, and like not be a joke. Like if this little subset of matches between Idra losing versus Xenio in the beginning of Season 3, MKP's Immortal game, as well as this finals, Terran is never played the same way, or it takes like a year plus for it to be figured out and discovered by another pro gamer and shown off. But one thing that's sort of up in the air and ethereal is we see NesTea going for hatch first, and at this time, remember, it was very risky to go hatch first. It wasn't seen as standard. It was like, well, you're going hatch first, you're going to get bunker rushed, even if it's a feign. That's what made bunker rush and being a Zerg in this time so difficult and brutal, is if bunker salvaged for 100%, it was like the Terran player could fake a bunker rush with the 2 Marines they were going to make with Rack CC anyway. And God forbid if there were 2 SCVs, because think if there was another SCV here and fucking NesTea got walled in, it would literally be GG tier. His natural hatchery is less than halfway done, and Marines are coming out. If he's complete walled in, like, he can just get trapped. So ridiculous what Zerg had to deal with. Even if you played Terran or think I'm a Zerg bleeding heart, like, guys, like anyone who knows anything about the game, as we see the fucking bunker die, anyone who knows anything about the game know that there shouldn't be like a 70% chance for one of the players to die to fucking like a rush, to like a one structure non-committal rush where they're already making the units anyway in their base, and the bunker just, if it gets up behind the mineral line and you miss it, if you sent your second overlord to scout, you know, God forbid you're on a map like Lost Temple where you like absolutely have to know what they're doing. Not only was it harder for Zerg to scout, but it was fucking harder for Zerg to take their natural. Look at Marine King. He's like trying to double bunker block him in almost every one of these games. This was the aggressive style that Marine King would employ throughout his entire career. Even when the double bunker block got patched out, he was still 2-raxing a lot, still doing SCV pull, still doing hyper-aggressive, polarizing play without scouting. Stuff that was honestly really fun to watch and sort of endearing. And if you were a Zerg and you were on this map pool, it was hell on earth. It was really hard to play against. And NesTea is trying to get a scout off, saying to himself, my god, like, am I about to get hit with 50 fucking Marines and 20 SCVs, or is this crazy SOB gonna expand? And he notices, alright, he's gonna expand. Now what's funny is, like, you can sort of deduce, like, alright, for the next, you know, like, in your mind you're thinking of a time frame, and it's like, I guess till the end of the game, win or lose, like, I'm about to be attacked by Bio. In the beginning, it doesn't even necessarily have to make sense. We saw in one of the games, Marine King was like, alright, my stim's 80% done, my factory and starport units are about to come online, I'm about to be at a huge power spike, let's attack with these 35 Marines I've been massing. You have to understand that months later, going into 2011, the metagame against Zerg started to sort of be the opposite. If people weren't going like your standard Hellion build, then what they were doing was very similar to Marine King style, like pressure at the beginning, but then they would go like quick 3 racks with the slightly better eco, and then maybe they would do more tower control, but then they would do a big 3 racks push with combat shields, or like combat shields and stem, or like +1 and slow. But really we saw it revolve around shields a lot, because shields was pretty fast and you were going to be making Marines anyway. And look, this is like a great example of the sort of pressure that a lot of Zergs nowadays like have no idea about. Normally, like, look at this pressure. Like, he almost lost his Banling nest and he's been massing Lings non-stop. He literally expected him to do this. He cut drones, played insanely safe. He's getting the Banling nest, isn't getting supply blocked. And it was like he was a little bit out of position. And look at this, he wants to get a surround here and kill all of the units. Really, even against players like MKP, what you want to do is surround everything, crush it, know that you're going to be safe for at least a minute, and be able to start your upgrades, make a wave of drones, make your queens, do your thing. What was the nightmare scenario is if you would kill a push half-heartedly and a bunch of Marines and medics and medevacs, Kappa, and Marauders, as we see NesTea just doing insane counter-attack damage. This is the sort of stuff I'm talking about, where the depots connected between the base of the ramp and the bunker to help our Terran hero? No. Were they at the top of the ramp, so all he had to do was lose 5 workers? No. He just made his depots at a random location, which is Sloppy Joe, and enabled himself to take counter-attack damage. Even when it's like this, it's like, I have 1 million units out, and you made Banelings, and that literally did no damage. It's like, the guy fucking got to your base and was like, he has no wall. I have to make Banelings. I just killed this whole army. Because the idea, from NesTea's perspective, like, I'm in the GSL finals down a game, this guy cuts all the corners in the world, doesn't wall in, is always spam dropping mules, and is on like a constant pressure style. If I can wax his army once, get the momentum, stampede into his base, kill a crap load of workers to cripple his economy, scout his entire base to make sure he's not like trying to go fucking Thor drop on me or some like weird 2-port nonsense, like he is in fact just going to be Marine King and rally Bio at me, I gotta go for the kill. Whenever you were playing Zerg at this time, it was way more tempting to try to sit on your opponent's face and decimate them, and we see NesTea tried to be like, oh, I'm going to morph my Banes, and then he was like, no, cancel them, I need those fucking 4 Lings. That's how cutthroat this era was, and notice that once he got up into that mule drop, he was able to say to himself, well, there's no way that I'm going to lose, because look how many SCVs he has, and at that moment, MKP was like, he's just going to kill my, 4 mules and 5 SCVs, I lose. So let's just consider that game before we go into the crucial set. If MKP had just pulled 2 SCVs, he could have gotten the double bunker block down. He had the money, and it would have been like NesTea would have been in a world of hell just to save his natural. But no, for whatever reason, he only brought 1 SCV, despite the fact he just like should have auto won the last 2 games on double bunker blocks. You have mules, it's not that big of a deal to pull 2 more in this situation with salvage and repair as good as it is. So what happens? MKP, not only does he not wall in, like the very basic bread and butter, like depot at the top of the ramp, barracks at the top of the ramp, and then another depot, he doesn't pull the SCVs for the auto win, and that you gotta imagine like NesTea like seeing that fucking one bunker with the Overlord and saying to himself like, holy shit, I almost just auto lost the GSL, and then he pulls fucking multiple workers, kills the SCV building the one bunker. And guys, if you don't understand, the reason that the double bunker block is so good is because you can't get like the drones or lings down there to surround. So then they just sit down there at the base with Marines there and kill your natural. Oh yeah, and there's no Ravager, lol. Which also means that the Roach doesn't have any value. Not only does the Ravager prevent you from being abused, but the Ravager makes Roaches have scaling value. So let's go into the final game. So, Game 7 of the GSL Finals. This is going to be an incredibly exciting game. Remember, going into this game, NesTea, the God, hadn't lost a single map. Now it's 3-3, winner take all. Every Zerg player is hoping they're going to spawn in cross positions or air positions, and they don't. They spawn in close by ground positions. And let me let that sink in, because this is so insanely good for Terran. Idra went as far as to say that it's even better than Steps of War, these positions. So if you're Marine King, no matter what the positions are, your go-to build here is depot at the top of the ramp, barracks right beside it, and then depot right after, because then it's going to be absolutely impossible to figure out what you're going to do if you're Zerg, because Overlord was way slower, Marine on patrol of your base, very hard to figure out what Terran's doing, and if you're in close positions, basically, if you don't know what they're doing, anytime they attack, they're going to be down your throat, and it's not going to be good. So NesTea scouts close by air, which is normal, and doesn't see anyone. And now he's sort of thinking to himself, like, alright, 50-50. I'm either at a huge disadvantage or I'm right where I want to be. And this was, in many ways, the core of imbalance at this time. Here we are into this epic GSL Finals. 3-3, two guys that perfectly exemplify certain styles with a ton of fans that would have a huge impact on the history of the game, and a huge part of this match is coming down to just positional imbalance. Holy crap, he just made a freaking hatch. So, hatch first versus double racks, and for no reason. I don't have production on here. That's like dim-witted. That's like that Brood War logic of like, oh yeah, they want the suspense, right? But anyway, at this time the game was so rush-centric, a lot of Zergs were like, I guess I'll have to open pool first and then hatch, or like speedling expand. It's because of players like Marine King that would literally make a bunker at your base whether they wanted to fuck with you or not. And here Marine King's licking his lips saying, oh baby, we're close positions. And I think NesTea, a lot of these Korean pro gamers can deduce just based on the timing, the scout timing, fuck. And he's going to know based on the Marine timing, because the scout can be a little random, but not the Marine. And look at this, MKP is going to pull workers, it's close positions, so hard for Zerg. Not even in a position where he can make lings. He doesn't want to get double bunker blocked, but notice he already has drones down onto the natural. Doesn't want to lose his Overlord either. And look at this, he wants to continue to stall, continue to move around, use all the larvae he has, wait until he can make lings, and just not die with drones. He doesn't want to lose a bunch of drones, and for Marine King to be in a position where they're about even and he can just drop mules. A spine goes down and lings are out. Marine King is not in as good of a position as he was before, and lings come on one side, drones surround the other, and this is exceptional for NesTea. This is exactly what you want. The dream. Notice he didn't get kited by the SCVs and take a bunch of damage while he lost drones. He was doing constant hull damage to what he wanted to, and with the spine over halfway done, NesTea has held the initial part of the rush, considering he has about 10 attacking units, and oh my god, Marine King is just going to pull the rest of his workers, minus just a handful. This is very common, the bit-by-bit style, I'm going to push, because a lot of Zergs would have said, I held it, and then made a bunch of drones, and if you got hit by this, all of a sudden you didn't hold it, especially if you canceled your spine or never made one, or tried to make a gas. This is so huge here, as everything in this series, the entire GSL has come down to this. NesTea doing what all smart Zergs do. He just is going to stall and stall and stall. He's okay taking damage on that hatch, and now he's going to pull everything at once. This is the fight that is going to determine the second ever GSL finals. Drones and Lings coming off and attacking the Terran units as all the SCVs fall, and Marine King is suddenly in some trouble here as he's being chased back by Lings. As it's 9 workers to 13, they are in close positions, Metalopolis. Marine King can just lift his wall up, play from behind, and maybe go for a follow-up push here, repair, and oh, wait a second, he built his depots behind his mineral line like a cretin, and now he's going to lose the GSL. Oh, okay. So if you're a long-time follower of this channel, you will know that I often reference this NesTea vs Marine King finals, and how it's sort of an allegory for Terran power at the time, and how it affected Terran players being consistent and learning and just doing the basic macro mechanics correctly. And this was just fucking awful. Like, all you have to do is do your basic barracks depot placement, and not only are you going to hide information and be more dangerous, but this is never going to happen. Like, you just retreat inside your base and spam repair with Wallen. And he doesn't necessarily win the finals here, but he doesn't just lose the Lings walking in his base. Look at this, he's heartbroken, poor kid. Think about how many ladder games he played, where his NesTea's like, holy shit, I won, I can't believe it. 29, and he wasn't a 1v1 tournament champion in Brood War. He wasn't like an MSL champion. And it's very interesting whenever you consider the dichotomy between NesTea and MKP. I mean, we can see the wedding band there. NesTea married. He figured out the way to play methodical macro Zerg on the absolute hardest maps and terrible era for Zerg. If we think about what FruitDealer did, and again, revisit that series if you haven't on my playlist, FruitDealer was so good at the hook and ladder, the surprise element, the flashy stuff. Marine King was the hyper-aggressive guy that would always be in your face, but the reason that NesTea is the successor to FruitDealer is because he said, look, when people are only going to have to improve for a couple months worth of time to not like die to this counter, this Baneling all-in, this Nidus, and like as NesTea discovered how to do perfect macro, and in Season 1 of this first ever GSL, Season 1 of the first ever GSL, Tesos and Artosis were not high on NesTea. They didn't think he was that good. And this is the season that turned NesTea into a meme, when he went through undefeated all the way up until the finals, and that's what really spawned all this, I'm NesTea, NesTea is a god. And if you just started following the game, you don't even know what I'm talking about. But Tesos and Artosis, it was a big joke. NesTea was like their favorite player. This is why this happened. You took the best aggressive Terran player who literally invented marine splitting, who beat legends and looked untouchable, including the defending champion, and he played NesTea, and NesTea had these situations where it looked like he was auto loss, even like especially the jungle basin game, just looked dead to rights. No way you lose that game if you're MK. Then that's no way you lose that game if you're MK. Like Jinro from that spot never loses that game in 100 years. That was the difference between a top-tier macro Terran and a guy like Marine King throughout their entire career, not just this era, is Marine King would take the extra step to be aggressive and really get up in your face and try to make you look bad and always keep you on the back foot and show off his micro, whereas a player like Jinro or MVP, they might do that aggressive 2 barracks build, but once you're on the back foot, they're going to go into the fast factory, get the quicker CC, and do the follow-up scouting that makes them safe. We saw like MKP was in the guy's base the whole time, and that if you go back and look at the series, that jungle basin game really was the defining factor, because that's one where he gets the double bunker block down, and he knows what his opponent's doing. He has tabs on him the whole time, and you just have got to follow through and win that one. And he just pulls an MKP and does what he was going to do regardless, and wants to play bio medevac the whole time. That was what MKP was famous for. I'm going to play my bio with my medevac. I don't need a factory. I'm just going to pressure, drop, pressure, micro. And it got to a point where it was like, alright, well, you dropped and pressured and dropped and pressured, and now there's banelings at your base, and you wanted your medevac so bad that even though that you knew an all-in was coming, you still were not properly prepared for it. And, you know, NesTea needed a couple breaks. He needed a couple moments where the master of the bunker rush didn't execute the bunker rush correctly. And that's how we have a 3 to 4 finals. So make sure you subscribe for more. The Gregathon will return. Make sure you hit the bell notification too.